Let's learn the books of the Bible. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers and Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, Job and Psalms and Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Songs. We're gonna learn the books of the Bible. We're gonna learn the books of the Bible. We're gonna learn the books of the Bible because we love God's Word. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel and Daniel, Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi. You did it! That's the Old Testament. We're gonna learn the books of the Bible. We're gonna learn the books of the Bible. We're gonna learn the books of the Bible because we love God's Word. You guys are doing great, but let's speed it up for the New Testament. Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, Acts and Romans, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, Galatians and Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, 1st and 2nd Timothy, Titus and Philemon. We're gonna learn the books of the Bible. We're gonna learn the books of the Bible. We're gonna learn the books of the Bible because we love God's Word. Let's keep going, everybody. Hebrews and James. Hebrews, James, 1st and 2nd Peter, 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, Jude and Revelation. Oh yeah, we did it! That's the New Testament. We're gonna learn the books of the Bible. We're gonna learn the books of the Bible. We're gonna learn the books of the Bible because we love God's Word. Now we know the books of the Bible. Now we know the books of the Bible. Now we know the books of the Bible because we love God's Word. Because we love God's Word.
Well, howdy y'all. Welcome back to another awesome week of Wildfire Kids Church Online. It's Western Week this week. Did you know that the Bible is not just a book? It's the greatest story ever told. Last week at Wildfire Kids Church, we looked at the book of Genesis and learned that we all need to be rescued from sin. We saw God's faithfulness to his people as his salvation plan unfolded. After the book of Genesis are the books of Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and Joshua. The books of Exodus through to Joshua show the constant faithfulness of God rescuing his people, from Moses and the 10 Commandments to Joshua and the crumbling walls of Jericho. These 4 books showcase God's incredible plan to rescue his people. I want to challenge you to read the book of Exodus together as a family this week. There's so much to learn. I know you're busy, but do you promise to try? Do you know, speaking of promises, there are a lot of promises made out there in the world, some big and some small. And there was one promise made by God a long time ago that had a lot of people wondering if it'd ever come through. Let's take a look at one of those stories found in the book of Exodus in the Old Testament. At the start of the book of Exodus, God's chosen people, the Israelites, were in slavery in the nation of Egypt. They'd been there for 400 years. Family after family after family were born into slavery. No one knew what it was like to be free, but they still lived with hope. Hope they would one day be saved, as God had promised hundreds of years before that he would send someone to save them and deliver them. They held on to God's promise to bring them into a land of their own. Over 5 books in the Old Testament, we see God's plan unfold.
God's people, the Israelites, were living in Egypt as slaves. Sun up to sundown, the mean old Pharaoh put them to work each and every day. Even though they were downright miserable, God never left them. He knew they needed help and sent Moses and Aaron to lead them to the promised land. Moses and Aaron listened to God and went to Pharaoh to tell him that it was time to let God's people go. Pharaoh didn't care. He liked having slaves around doing all the work for him, so he refused to hear what they had to say. Moses didn't know what to do, so he prayed and asked for help. God reminded Moses that he would never leave him and that he would save his people. God told Moses and Aaron to go talk to Pharaoh again. So that's exactly what they did. They said, "Let God's people go." But Pharaoh's answer was still the same, a big N-O. God told Moses and Aaron that Pharaoh would ask them to perform a miracle. So Aaron took his walking stick, threw it down on the ground, and it turned into a mean old snake. That didn't bother Pharaoh none. He still refused to obey God's command to let his people go. It was time for some drastic measures. Moses then met Pharaoh at the Nile River and asked him one more time to let God's people go. But wouldn't you know it, he still didn't listen. So God told Moses that Aaron should use the walking stick to strike the river. And when he did, it turned right into blood. You'd think that would be enough to convince Pharaoh, but no sirree. That Pharaoh stayed stubborn and refused to let God's people go. God had Moses try to convince Pharaoh 9 more times. To prove that he was for his people, God brought punishment on Pharaoh and the Egyptians, and boy, they sure did suffer. Picture this. God sent thousands of frogs, hippity-hopping all over town, the whole place smelling worse than an old boot. Then swarms of gnats and flies buzzing around everyone's head. It didn't get better from there either. I'm talking animals dying left and right, boils all over their skin, hail falling from the sky, locusts flying all around, darkness for days, and by golly, even death. Now, the whole time this was happening, the Israelites were just waiting and wondering when they would be set free. They knew that God hadn't left them, and that one fine day they would see the Promised Land. After all this crazy mess, Pharaoh had finally had enough, and he let God's people go. As they were heading out of town, God sent a cloud to lead them by day and a fire to lead them by night. God had never left them while they were in Egypt, and he would never leave them on their long journey to the Promised Land.
No, God's people didn't enter the Promised Land right away. They spent time in the desert wilderness. Soon, they began to complain and say they were better off back in Egypt as slaves. Even though they complained and disobeyed God, God was faithful to them all the time.
Traveling through the desert wasn't always an easy time for the Israelites. It was hard to find food and shelter out in the desert as they headed towards the land God had promised them. But instead of just asking God for help, they started complaining, grumbling, and carrying on. Can you believe? After everything that God had done, they just wanted to forget it all and go back to being slaves. Well, even with their complaining, God sure did love his people and wanted to help them. God told Moses and Aaron that he had a plan. He'd cause food to fall from the sky each and every day, enough grub for everyone's bellies to get a plenty full. Moses and Aaron told the Israelites what God had planned on doing and that they should keep trusting that God would take care of them just like he said he would. And sure as the sun comes up in the morning and the moon shines at night, God provided for them. Well, we all know that once you get in a good meal, you get thirsty. And sure enough, that's what the Israelites complained about next. Moses kept leading the Israelites through the desert, but in case you didn't know, there ain't no water in the desert. The people became frustrated again, and they complained because they were so thirsty. Moses knew he needed God's help, so once again, he asked God what to do. God took care of his people by telling Moses to go in front of the Israelites and strike a rock with his walking stick. As Moses struck the rock, water flowed from it and everyone was able to get something to drink. God had helped them once again. Even when the people had been complaining instead of trusting God, he still helped them by letting food fall from the sky and water flow from the rock. God sees us in our troubles, and when we ask him, he will help us.
God's story in the books of Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and Joshua introduces us to some important people. Moses and his brother Aaron, Pharaoh, and Joshua. Do you know, Joshua is the leader who takes the Israelites into the Promised Land. There's giants, plagues, earthquakes, collapsing cities, hero spies, and heavenly visitors. It's amazing. The story found in these books could be summed up by this thought: God cares for his people. Through slavery, wilderness, and the promised land, we see God's love and care. He cares enough to free his people and deliver them into an amazing promise. And that promise is here for you and me today. Hebrews 13:6 in the Message version tells us, "Since God assured us, I'll never let you down, never walk off and leave you." We boldly quote, God is there ready to help. I'm fearless no matter what. Who or what can get to me? You know, that is a promise that will change your life. God takes care of his people. Let me hear you say that with me. God takes care of his people. Great job. Well, I've got to head on out of here and mosey along, but I hope I'll see you all at Wildfire Kids Church in real life next week. Bye!